Hello, my name is Jose Triana. As you can probably tell, I'm a very right-wing Republican person.
Very subtle.
I have two questions. The first one is, what do you say to the people that say like Israel is no better than Palestine for like what Israel did with the airstrikes and for what Palestine did on October the 7th? Now, for the record, I do support Israel, but I just wanted to ask this. I've had many debates with
people. It comes up all the time.
And they just kind of seem to either not answer or they just kind of basically say that like it's okay for Palestine to do it, but not for Israel. So I just wanted to hear like what should I say to those people?
Yeah, well, I think you can agree with two things at once, right? That like death is bad, but it's also important the context of that death, right? There's, for example, like the analogy I use is say there's two people who died in a car crash, right? They both died in a car crash. Both are bad. One of them was driving on the correct side of the road, and a drunk driver hit them. The other person was the drunk driver. Right? Are their deaths the same? Are both sides equally to blame for the other's deaths? No. And so the idea that both people died and that's the be-all and end-all in the equation is simply ridiculous. And so I think that's what you've got to do is like, Israel is not as bad as Hamas because they killed people or they killed more people. Because it matters how that was done and the motivation behind it. Like Hamas went into Israel and also Palestinian civilians went with Hamas with the intent of just slaughtering people because they were Jewish, taking hostages because they were Jewish, raping women because they were Jewish, chopping hands and legs off because they were Jewish, burning families alive because they were Jewish. Then the IDF going into Israel going into Gaza with airstrikes or with actual personnel on the ground, their goal is to seek out the people who committed those acts to get hostages back. The fact that people are killed along the way is awful, but that doesn't mean that what Israel is doing is the same morally as what Hamas is doing.
Yeah, I know that. I try to tell these people.
Well, because what they're trying to do is they're relying on the Palestinian propaganda, which takes advantage of Western squishiness when it comes to this stuff.
Absolutely.
Which is just like, war is bad, obviously. They're masters of propaganda, which is why you see the same people getting killed on multiple days in Palestinian media. It's why you see useful shills like Mehdi Hassan over here making these equivocations. That's why you see the Nazi analogy being used. It's all a propaganda campaign to distract from the fact that Hamas wants to kill all the Jews. And Israel does not want to kill all the Palestinians.
Absolutely.
Because if they did, they could do it in 30 seconds. Right? The Palestinian population is growing in Israel and all over the Middle East. Like that is not a genocide, that is not ethnic cleansing. But the problem is all of this is just propaganda. Because if you equate the two, then you downplay terrorism. That's the goal, is to justify terrorism, to excuse it, to ignore it. Because ultimately these people, if you're trying to make that equivocation, they're trying to equivocate away terrorism. They're trying to bring both sides down to the same level rather than trying to bring the Palestinians up by holding both sides to the same account. That's the goal.
All right. And my second question is, what do you say to people that like, whether it's on campus or somewhere else, that like have family members in Palestine and feel sort of, well, not obligated, but like, they want to support Palestine because they have family there? Because I have a friend who has family members in Palestine and I understand that he's very troubled by what's going on, but he's a nice kid. He's not, like he's not a crazy Hamas terrorist. He's, a kid just like me, in college. So my question is, well, what should I say to him? Like, how should he, like, where should he be in this, in this sort of conflict?
Well, again, it's perfectly fine to be pro-Palestinian, whether or not you're pro-Palestinian, right? You can be pro-Palestinian and pro-Israeli if you're talking about the right to life. The moment you're pro-Hamas, you're not pro-Palestinian anymore. And so, like, just a regular person, right? You just happen to be Palestinian. You can want a Palestinian state. That doesn't mean you think Israel should be erased from the map, right? There's all these middle grounds that are perfectly reasonable that have been offered multiple times. The problem I have is there are a lot of reasonable Palestinians. There are a lot of Palestinians who want peace.
Yeah.
There aren't as many as the media will tell us because Hamas still has large, if not majority, support. But the fact is there are Palestinians who want peace. There are Palestinians and Jews who live side by side in Israel, but also in the West Bank, places like that. That does happen. You never hear about it, right? Because that's not part of the narrative. But those people don't have a voice because Hamas are like the mob, right? They shut down anyone around them. That's why they kill Palestinians and no one ever hears about it. And so I think in some ways it's hard because there are people out there who have a voice and there's only so much we can do elevating those voices here because here that voice doesn't really matter, right? In some way, the Palestinians need a leadership that isn't entirely based on terrorism for us to ever move forward, because the moment you've got terrorism in the mix, no sovereign nation is expected to live next door to terrorists and just like be okay with that.
Yeah.
Right? There is no state in the country that would be quite happy to live next to another state that's firing rockets at their schools every single day. Right? It's a non-starter. It's absurd. Yeah, and so then it comes to a matter of like, okay, well, I assume he's anti-terrorism if he's a reasonable person. Yeah. So how do you spread that as a majority position amongst Palestinian people to the point that they can actually get someone like Hamas out? And that's where you can actually be pro-Israel, because Israel is trying to destroy Hamas. Now, I don't think they're going to do what like the American military did in places like Iraq, for example, and then leave a void that the next terrorist group comes in and they're even worse and all that stuff. There's always a next terrorist group, but I think it's how you approach the after, right? It's how you approach tomorrow. And I think Israel cares a lot more about that because they're not going anywhere, right? They're not flying in, destroying the enemy and then leaving. They are living where they are fighting. And so I think there's motivation on one side to deal with Hamas and the future, but you need both sides to actually want that same future.
Yeah.
You might have disagreements over territory, right? That's fine to have. I'm sure there are plenty of Palestinians who have somewhat reasonable arguments in favor of, like, say, our ancestors who lived on land, maybe own land. There is a difference. The fact that you live somewhere doesn't give you a right to that land. But there are arguments in favor of having territory for one side or the other, but that's not an excuse to kill women and children over it, right? If we can agree on that, then we can move forward.
Yeah.
And so I assume he's one of those people, in which case you can just have a regular conversation.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he is. You know, he is.
And it's also okay to ask, right? I think a lot of this is showing someone with respect of not assuming their belief because they're a member of an identity group, right? This is, I think, something we all criticize the left for every single day, is the obsession over identity politics of, like, oh, you're black, you would have voted for this person, right?
Yeah,
you're seeing the Democrats right now, like, they're shocked.
People here are pro-Israel, so they think I hate all Palestinians. That's not the case.
Exactly. I mean, the problem is there are some pro-Israel people who do hate all Palestinians, right? But they're a tiny minority. And so it's up to you to present your view accurately. But then I think it's also up to you to kind of, as the left say, do the work and actually understand what someone thinks before debating them, right? Because I think that's what happens a lot here, is that you have two sides who assume what either side thinks. Sometimes they're right, but sometimes they're wrong. And it's worth spending the 30 seconds to find out.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks.